Hello, number 15. So we're starting off in 1993. Now, this is Pagan. Aimlessly wandering through the Devonport Mall, Pagan walked from one clothes shop to the next on a lethargic whim to pass the time and decrease her wardrobe space. The icy wind from Cradle Mountain cursed the city and stung Pagan's already flushed cheeks. Pulling her pale pink beanie further down over her forehead and tightening her scarf around her neck, she reprimanded herself for wearing a long but thin skirt, even though her knee-high socks were woolen and her cherry red Doc Martens shoes were cold resistant and weather hardy. Her purse contained a $10 note, and after an hour of shopping, Pagan was losing hope of making a purchase with it. Exiting the mall and turning right, Pagan decided she would rent a video instead with her money. After all, the weather summoned complete submission indoors. Bracing herself for the blistery weather outside the store, she threw the video Bram Stoker's Dracula into her school bag. She was pleased to be going home. As she walked towards the bus stop, a business sign rocking back and forth on its hinges grabbed Pagan's attention. It read second-hand books. She looked at her watch. She had already 20 minutes. She still had 20 minutes before the bus was due. Pagan felt a rush of exhilaration. Dodging the traffic, she crossed the road, slipping as she jumped over the curb onto the footpath. She laughed from embarrassment. Bursting into the basement shop, eager to find a unique gift for Thomas, she sneezed from the dust. A voice from somewhere behind the thousands of books said, "Bless you." Thank you. Pagan's eyes adjusted to the dimness of the shop. It was packed with thousands of books of all sizes and widths, jammed into bookshelves, whilst the excess was piled onto the floor. Piles of books in clusters of 5 or 6 reaching the high ceilings. There were barely any room for her to walk. Where to start? She dropped her school bag near the front door and walked over to the closest pile of books. Squatting down to read the title, she laughed when her knees creaked. There was no obvious alphabetical system, nor any system she could recognise. Strangely, her eyes glazed over, making it difficult to read the book titles. Her fingertips helped as she ran them under the leather bind. "Wow, these books are old," she said under her breath. Pagan blinked several times as she read WollstoneCraft Mary. The author's name was familiar. Slipping her fingers carefully around the brown leather, she dusted it off. Smelling the pages, a wave of nostalgia swept over her. Books reminded her of Thomas and the special time that they spent together in the hedges. It seemed like a lifetime ago. She read the title again, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. What did vindication mean? Flipping the cover over, she bit her bottom lip as she read more. The book had been published in 1792 by a woman in England. Had Thomas read her this book? It seemed so familiar. She flipped open the random page and read that women is naturally weak or degraded by the concurrence of circumstance is, I think, clear. But this position I shall simply contrast without a conclusion, which I have frequently heard from sensible men in favour of an aristocracy, I can't say it, but that the mass of mankind cannot be anything or the obsequent slaves who patiently allow themselves to be penned up, would feel their own consequence and spurn their chains. Men, they further observe, submit everywhere to oppression, where they have only to lift their heads to throw off the yoke. Yet instead of asserting their birthright, they quietly lick the dust and say, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." Women, I argue from analogy, are degraded by the same propensity to enjoy the present moment, and at last despise the freedom which they have not enough virtue to struggle to obtain. But I must be more explicit. Pagan read the same paragraph several times. The words were written in English, but seemed foreign to her in how they were written, while oddly familiar at the same time. A male voice broke her concentration. "All books are 50 cents off this week." Pagan slammed the book shut. "Excuse me?" Taken back by a young man standing in front of her, Pagan drew breath, as if it were the first breath she had ever inhaled. A breath that tingled her toes and fluttered her stomach. A breath that was indeed the most relaxing breath she had ever taken. Her eyes focused on him. The sight of him made her gasp. She had this overwhelming urge to run into his arms. Stepping backwards inside, she knocked a pile of books over which landed on the floor, creating an obstacle between her, limiting her escape. She blushed. All books are 50 cents off this week, he repeated, but this time with a smirk. Pagan looked at the book for a price tag. She had enough money to purchase it. Fumbling in her pocket, she pulled out the remainder of her spending money. He would need to give her change. Following him through the labyrinth of books to the counter, Pagan handed him a $5 note, still blushing. Pagan knew him from somewhere but could not place him. Smelling of brute cologne and wearing old grey trousers and red velvet jacket, he had a baby face that reminded her of a freshly groomed gangster. Pagan felt an electricity safety with the stranger. Aesthetically, he was pleasing to Pagan. His ash blonde hair curling softly around his tanned face and his exceptionally long eyelashes highlighting his vivid green eyes made her hormones rage. She suddenly felt very insecure in her own attractiveness. Here's your change. Placing the money and book into a white plastic bag with a receipt, he handed it over the counter to her. She thanked him, lingering before thanking him again. Before this time attempting to leave the shop, even though she only managed to move forwards a few steps. Turning around, she walked quickly, jumping over several books. He followed her through the shop, watching her exit. Realizing only after a few steps that she had forgotten to buy Thomas a book, she smiled. It'd be a good excuse to return. Opening the door, the wind howled into the shop, blowing her hair up and off her face. She hesitated as he looked at her, eyebrows raised. I have a movie, she splattered out. Red-faced and awkward, he accepted Pagan's invitation as she stood firm in the bookshop doorway, organising her first ever date. Okay, Friday night at 7 p.m. Scribbling on a scrap of paper with a broken pencil found at the bottom of her school bag, she handed it to him. Her hand shook, revealing the fake shield. Her skin tingled as they touched. Here is my address and phone number. Then she pulled her hair back, exposing the delicacies of her neck. I'm looking forward to Friday. Amy had taught her the art of gentle persuasion and bogus buoyancy. You see, honey, everyone wears a mask. Choose your mask carefully because one day you will be your mask. Self-illusion is powerful, darling. Don't underestimate it. Heading to the bus stop, Pagan could not contain her excitement. Her footsteps floated and her cheekbones heightened to where her eyes squinted. She felt absolute happiness. I nearly cried reading that bit. I got really overwhelmed, and I think I'm going to get overwhelmed. I went to uni, and it was a really bad time in my life. Divorce, little children, working jobs, and I got really sick at my graduation, so I didn't go to my graduation. And a lot of people didn't think I actually finished university and just thought I'd wasted another 4 fucking years of my life, basically. And I felt like I had as well, because I went in to do social work and I hated it. And I went in and I loved psychology to a point. Put me into criminology, forensic, love it. Did Aboriginal studies, loved it as well. But what I really loved was history. Really loved history. Sorry. And I remember reading WollstoneCraft and I just felt her pain. That you had this highly intelligent woman in a time where people thought she was dumb. And she had this tragedy through her life, and was madly in love with, I think his name was Imran or Ilham, something like that. And he just broke her heart. And then she met this wonderful man. And he saw her for the intellect that she was. Now, I'm not saying it was a highly romantic relationship, but he saw that she was really smart. And it still happens today. It still happens today. She died in childbirth. And so the female part took her. Like the beauty of the feminine took her, And it's just at the age, I think she was age 32. And it's just an awful story. And I felt her pain. I was about the same age when I was at uni. I'd done it, a bit later on. And I wanted, I went in there maybe wanting to be a teacher, maybe wanting to do this. And I never really did anything with it. I wasted that opportunity. But I took with it the WollstoneCraft Legacy. And it was the beginning of my story. It was her story that helps me to have written this story. This is why it's called the WollstoneCraft Legacy, because I felt as a woman I needed to continue on the storytelling. By all means, you know that I have trouble with the writing and all that stuff, but I wanted to convey that years later, 300 years later, 200 years later, not much had changed, for the inside of women. So it was really important, and it's been a long journey writing this book series. I've finished my second book and have started my third book of the series, and it's been a sacrifice, and it hasn't been a financial win for me. So it's been a financial sacrifice because you never get your money back. I haven't got my money back. I'm not an international author. Nobody gives a fuck. I'm just a nobody. But I do it because I can't not do it. I do it because I love it. So it's quite emotional about this section because it's brought back all those memories back then. And of course, it's brought back my first love. I had to talk about the book shop. It's actually my great friend Pete Jeremy in Ulverston. I think it's called Pete Jeremy Antique Bookstore or something like that. Go in there. It's exactly as I have written it. It is. It's just a magical little shop, and it's chaotic. I actually get really overwhelmed in there with my psychic ability because there's so much energy on the books. And I actually have nearly passed out in that bookshop. So, but go check it out because it's a great little shop. And also about the first love. So I'm talking about my first love. It's absolutely his description. He looked like that. I fantasize if this ever became a movie that Leonardo DiCaprio would play in. But of course now Leonardo's a bit too old to play. So, and also I've written in here $10 to go shopping. Like that, how cheap is that to actually get some clothing now? You need to take $100 out now to actually buy anything. So, you can see that things have certainly changed in that time. So I will stop being a Suki Lala and continue. So Pagan, Rogan sat on the lumpy chocolate brown embossed leather couch. His legs stretched out, his long feet rested on the ottoman, giving the appearance he was relaxed, while his lifted shoulders and crossed arms suggested the opposite. The smell of his cheap cologne intoxicated the 17-year-old, who sat only a bum's width away from him in the dimly lit room. Desire and fear consumed her. It had taken several days after the argument before she had returned home. Aislinn had held her tightly at the front door while Cain ignored her. Tension was still high, but they had all eased into a polite truce. With Cain and Aislinn gone for the evening, Pagan had the house to herself until 11 o'clock, and it was 10:30. It was the first time Pagan had ever invited a male over. If in fact he thought it was a date, she was unsure. On purpose, she had kept it secret from her parents that a boy was coming over. She had never felt so scared in her entire life. Tonight there was not a mask that could save her from the anxiety she felt, and in the dim light of the lounge room she had no option but to present the truth to him. A bowl of microwave popcorn and 2 cups of lime green fizzy cordial sat on the table. Neither had been touched. Struggling to converse with him, Pagan wished he would make the effort to communicate with her, instead of using his eyes to speak. Like a dart champion, he aimed, throwing his gaze towards the target, her. She could not handle one more intimidating stare from him. In fear, she would faint. Insecure, Pagan's eyes darted around his face. The only three men in her life were her father, Norman, and Thomas, and none of them had taught her how closed off men, and all they had taught her was how closed off men could be. Pagan had only learned the negative aspects of love, and so in that moment of lust, she struggled with her desire to please Rogan. It never occurred to her to please herself as well. She was her mother's daughter after all, even though it pained her to believe it. Pagan brought her attentions back to the movie. Its dark connotations enticed Pagan to move noticeably closer to Rogan. When their elbows touched, her chest flushed as if she had just bathed in Tabasco sauce. The plot of the movie explored a love that far surpassed one lifetime, a love between a man who became a beastly entity and a woman both trapped within a state of unhappiness until they found each other, a love that created catastrophe to anyone who tried to hinder it. How romantic, Pagan thought. Her peripheral vision was working overtime. She stared at Rogan's muscular arms and the prominent veins that pulsed along his foreheads. "Kiss me already," her body screamed. Her skin was on fire and her heart was beating so fast she was sure Rogan would notice her chest heaving. Pagan grabbed her cordial and scalded it and then clumsily placed it back on the coffee table. "Can you please stop the movie for a second, Pagan?" Grabbing the remote, she pressed pause, accidentally touching his kneecap. "Is everything okay?" He screwed his face up. "Can we just chat for a while? I'm struggling to concentrate." Feeling a sense of rejection, even though she wasn't sure why, Pagan shuffled away from him on the couch. Her gums dried and she suddenly felt an overwhelming sensation she was about to experience her first heartbreak before they had even kissed. "How is the book going?" "Book?" "Yes, the book from the shop." His eyes refused to look anywhere else but at her. She wriggled on the couch, feeling unsettled. "I've read a few pages, but I'm struggling with the content. I know this is weird, but I feel like I've read it before, only I can't remember when. Strange, hey?" Lifting his feet off the ottoman, he swung himself around to face her, his feet now buried underneath his thighs. "Can I say something really weird as well?" Without waiting for her response, he continued, "I feel like I know you, like really know you, like forever." Grabbing the bowl of popcorn, she shoved a large handful into her mouth, awkwardly munching into an animated manner. She had felt the same. Her body had burned the moment she saw him. But how was she to respond to him? Nodding, her mouth too full to reply, she urged him to continue by circling her hand in a fast-forward motion. His eyes searched for acceptance as if he too feared rejection. Unknowing. "I've never felt like this before. I know I'm only 19, but it feels intense when I'm near you. I feel a humming between us." The conversation had suddenly become serious. Pagan crunched and swallowed the popcorn. "Can I kiss you, Pagan?" Nervously smiling with eyes as wide as saucepans, she nodded her head in approval, unaware that mush popcorn unattractively coated her teeth. "Put the mask on before you lose yourself to him," she repeated in her mind. He leaned in. Pagan froze. She had never kissed anyone before. He pulled her chin closer to him. His lips touched hers. Her body quivered as a rush so intense consumed her body and she felt dizzy. In one kiss, she had become addicted. Wow, to feel that kind of intensity again. Now, obviously, I've used the movie Dracula because it's meant to parallel the relationship between these two. So you're getting a little bit of a hint of where we're going with this relationship. Now, so that you would suspect after reading that this is it a feeling? Has there been a spell put on them? Or is it that they do know each other from another time? So a little bit of playfulness with my writing there. And also, that's my lounge room, the ottoman, the brown chairs when I grew up. So we're going to London, and this is Aggie. "Of course I felt it, fucking moron. I don't pay you to ask me questions. Now organise the crone monarchs to get their fat asses down here right now." Slamming the phone down on the office table, it rolled, landing near the pens. Aggie screamed, a shriek so vile her personal assistant, who was returning from the toilet, hurried back to her office. It was going to be a bad day. Slumping into the office chair, Aggie kicked off her black high heels, hurling the first shoe at the wall. It bounced off the plaster, landing like a rock skimming across the water onto the carpet. Not satisfied, Aggie threw the second one, which pierced the plaster, lodging itself firmly into the wall. Aggie's black humour released a crazy cackle. Tears from laughing formed watery paths down her puffy cheeks, smudging her eye makeup. Decisively, she reached into the handbag, pulling out a small mirror to remind herself of her attractiveness, for whom she was not sure. Arms stretched out, Aggie's eyes struggled to focus on her senior face. "Old hag," she said as she wiped away the smudging eyeliner from underneath her sagging eyes with the tissue wet with spit. Pulling a lipstick out of her tailored suit pocket, she sloppily painted over her dry lips. Her pale, wrinkly face needed the colour. "I look like a clown." Aggie dropped the mirror into her handbag. She heard it crack. Feeling a headache developing, she rubbed her forehead with her palm. The ache simply moved to the back of her head. Regretting a decision that she had manipulated 17 years earlier, Aggie now had to deal with the soulmates for the first time, by herself and without previous knowledge of them. She knew that this day might happen, but she was disappointed that someone who she trusted and had paid well had let her down, perhaps betrayed her on purpose. She would deal with them later. Their job had been easy: make sure the soulmates are never together before the witch awakening. If only I had the ancient doctrine, she thought. She had enjoyed most of her reign as supreme femininity. There had only been the odd ancient witch uprising to deal with, but otherwise it had been a relatively easy transition. Queen Lizzie and all her Queen Lizzie and all her public servants had welcomed Aggie, of course. Of course, had the Queen and Parliament objected, it would have been hypocritical, and Aggie would have enjoyed pointing that fact out to Her Majesty. Aggie sat back on her office chair, rubbing her aching feet. "I do look forward to meeting you, oh powerful one, the powerful pagan." Playing out several different scenarios in her head, she finally settled on what felt right. It was time to collect the wretched maiden. Sorry, I've just had a notification come through and one of my good friends has just sent me the best text ever. And I'm so excited for her. It was time to collect the wretched maiden. It was nearly time for her awakening, and it was safer to have her supervised properly by witches she could trust rather than those who she could not trust in Tasmania. Aggie cackled, and won't it go off with a rip? Opening the top drawer of the desk, Aggie dumped all of the contents onto the tabletop. Squinting, she found her personal phone book, flipped through the pages until she reached the letter D. Aha, there you are. Now, where did that phone go? Aggie's patience was waning as she dialed the international number. I'm just going to go back now and have a quick look. Aggie, I mean, she's so vain, isn't she? Like, it's a little, I mean, I have based this on one of my family members, but it's funny, like and it's a bit of a joke. Like, as my family gets, the ladies in my mum's side get older, because they were stunning. Like, I'm talking stunning women, like stunning women, where you would kind of look and go, wow, just so attractive. But as they got older, their vanity didn't disappear, and they were, they'd put the makeup on and they really thought even in their 70s they were hot as shit. So it's really funny, and they weren't lacking their own self-importance. So I'm having a bit of and I'm sure I will be the same, like when I get to that age. You never actually, although I spend most of my time going, what the hell is happening to my body? So let's go to Australia. This is Emily. Emily butted out her just lit cigarette into the ashtray, annoyed. She had been expecting a phone call and had hesitated to light up, knowing that once she did, it would ring. Sitting down on the chair, she answered, "Hello?" Not surprised to hear a female voice, she praised herself for her excellent intuition. "Yes, I've been expecting a phone call from you." Crossing her legs, she doodled on the pad next to the phone to channel some of the rising wrath towards the witch who had rung. Now was not the time to be emotionally explosive, she had to think clearly. No, I had nothing to do with their meeting, and I'm terribly upset you would not only assume, but then to have the gumption to accuse me of that, knowing how much I love her. She is the high priestess of my coven, and I have an underlying loyalty to her, which is more than I can say for you. Tapping the pen on her thigh, Amy's internal rage was bubbling. How dare a non-ancient witch speak to her as if they were equals? They were not. Can we focus? I have a feeling they have already sent someone to collect her. They would be petrified she will regain her magic before they can get to her first. We won't have long, so panicking won't help. Placing the pen down, Amy flipped open the cigarette packet and pulled out a cigarette. Placing it into the left side of her mouth, she grabbed the lighter and lit the cigarette while the voice on the other side of the phone battered her with more apprehensive babble. Don't swing your sword my way. I've been awakened for 5 years. There's only so much I can do in a world I have no power in, Amy snapped. Resentment had settled in her throat. The voice retreated slightly now. Now was the time for Amy to take precedence over the conversation. There is no point worrying about how they met. We need to make sure we swing the pendulum our way. Aggie thinks she is clever, but she isn't that clever. Amy took an exaggerated drag of the cigarette. We both know there is a way for Pagan to gain her magic prior to the awakening. They fear it. Why don't we do it? Once awakened, she will be too powerful for them to curtail. The voice became fearful. Oh, you've had a vision. Your visions don't really help much, do they? Amy rolled her eyes in repugnance and waited impatiently for the voice to come down before she spoke again. I understand you love her and worry what will happen afterwards. I doubt they will kill her and fear it will cause another uprising. I love her too, but we are dealing with something larger than love. Pagan should be sitting on the 13th throne with me beside her, not that bitch. The voice interrupted, furthering angering Emily. I don't give a fuck what Aggie and the monarchs would do to me if they hear me. No one has hacked my phone. I am royalty and I always will be, and you, my dear, are a non-ancient and would be wise to remember that when you speak to me. Amy took another drag of the cigarette. Look, we encourage their bond. Make it look like Pagan encouraged it. The voice complacently agreed. How can we fail? We have the goddesses on our side. Tired of the conversation, Amy slammed the phone down. On the other end, Aislinn heard the phone disconnect, but she continued the conversation as if Amy was still listening, now saying what she was really thinking. Amy, you are consumed by ego and pride, and you are a foolish witch. What if the goddesses are not on your side? I may not be an ancient witch, but I've lived long enough to know how unreliable dogma is, and my vision told me you will fail. She will be travelling soon to meet Aggie, and I have seen Pagan die. Aislinn wondered if she could contact the Crone monarchy, and hand Pagan over to them peacefully. Make a deal, save her daughter from potential death. Aislinn was sure that they would use Pagan as a political statement, which meant Pagan was about to experience the worst fate imaginable. Perhaps they would spare Pagan the foreboding misery that was surely planned for her if they saw that she was compliant to their plight. After all, her own mother was a non-ancient. Pagan was an innocent until awakened. It would be political suicide to have her killed before she gained her magic. They would not want to upset the goddesses. Nervous laughter escaped Aislinn's mouth. Aggie had spent the last 17 years making sure the soulmate's path never crossed, and she had failed. They had met in a bookshop of all places. Maybe the goddesses were very much awake. So now we know that Aislinn, being Pagan's mum, is having some sort of insight, some sort of foresight that something bad is going to happen to Pagan. Now, mysteriously, as life is mysterious, the soulmate has arrived. So we know that Rogan is the soulmate. So these two have been soulmates for eternity, since the Red and the Black War. So we know that they're like magnets and nothing can stop them. So of course, Rogan doesn't know who Pagan is. Once she's awakened, she will know who he is, because that was one of the stipulations, that he will never, ever know that. And you can still see even though Emily and Aislinn are on the same page. Emily just can't get over the fact that there is a hierarchy difference between them, and in her mind that there always has been, and it's only since Aggie which has made them now equal, and she's not coping. There's a real ego with Emily about that. So I'm going to wrap it up there at 30 minutes. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.